Betrayal has a distinct sound. For Leora, it wasn't a scream, but the chilling silence of the wind as her fiancé shoved her off a 300-foot cliff. She expected death. Instead, she fell into the icy waiting arms of a monster, and the greatest revenge story ever told began. The Scottish Highlands were notoriously unforgiving in November, wrapped in a suffocating blanket of grey mist and biting winds. Leora Harrington stared out the passenger window of the rented Range Rover, her fingers anxiously twisting the 3-carat diamond ring on her left hand. She was the sole heiress to Harrington Pharmaceuticals, a modern dynasty built on blood pressure medications and aggressive corporate acquisitions. Yet despite her billions, the only thing she truly valued was sitting right next to her. Robert Pendleton. Robert was a rising star in London's venture capital scene, handsome, ruthlessly ambitious, and dripping with an old money charm that had completely disarmed Leora from the moment they met at a charity gala in Mayfair. They were to be married in exactly 3 weeks. This weekend getaway to Glencoe was supposed to be their final private retreat, a chance to breathe before the media circus of a high-society wedding consumed them. "You're quiet." Robert noted his voice smooth, betraying none of the tension that crackled in the damp air. He turned the steering wheel sharply, navigating the winding, treacherous road that snaked alongside the towering cliffs of Ionac Egach. "Just thinking about the wedding," Leora lied, forcing a smile. In truth, she felt a gnawing anxiety in her stomach. Over the past month, she had caught Robert taking hushed, frantic phone calls at odd hours. She had noticed unexplained withdrawals from their joint accounts. But love had a funny way of making a brilliant woman willfully blind. "Let's stretch our legs," Robert announced, abruptly pulling the heavy vehicle onto a secluded rocky shoulder overlooking a sheer, terrifying drop. Below them, the dark, churning waters of Loch Leven crashed violently against jagged rocks. It was isolated. There wasn't another car house or living soul for miles. Leora stepped out, pulling her cashmere coat tightly around her shoulders. The wind whipped her auburn hair across her face. She walked toward the edge, mesmerized by the violent beauty of the drop. It was a 300-foot plunge into a watery grave. "It's breathtaking, isn't it?" Robert murmured, stepping up close behind her. His chest pressed against her back, and his arms wrapped around her waist. For a fleeting second, Leora felt safe. Then the passenger door of the Range Rover clicked open. Leora turned her head slightly, her heart hammering against her ribs as high heels crunched against the wet gravel. Out stepped Beatrice Lawson. Beatrice was Leora's chief financial officer, her trusted confidant, and supposedly her best friend. "Beatrice," Leora breathed, confusion paralyzing her. "What are you doing here? Did you follow us?" Beatrice didn't look like a woman who had just crashed a romantic getaway. She wore a tailored black trench coat, her expression cold and calculating. She walked to the edge of the cliff, stopping just a few feet from Robert and Leora, and lit a slim cigarette. "She didn't follow us, Leora," Robert whispered, his breath hot against Leora's ear. The warmth in his voice was entirely gone, replaced by a metallic, terrifying deadness. "I invited her." Before Leora could process the words, Robert's grip on her waist tightened to an agonizing degree. "Robert, you're hurting me," Leora gasped, trying to pry his fingers away. "Do you have any idea how much debt I'm in?" "Leora," Robert's voice dripped with sudden venomous resentment. "My firm went under 6 months ago. I owe £40 million to people who don't send collection letters, they send men with hammers. You were supposed to be my lifeline. But your father's prenuptial agreement was airtight. I'd get nothing if we divorced. I get nothing while we're married." Leora's world began to spin. The mist, the rocks, Beatrice's passive face, it all blurred into a surreal nightmare. "Robert, please. If you need money, just ask me. I can help you. We can fix this." Beatrice exhaled a plume of grey smoke, her eyes devoid of pity. He doesn't want your help, Leora. He wants the life insurance payout. £50 million payable to the surviving spouse in the event of an accidental death. And with me managing the company's internal accounts, ensuring the policy was fully underwritten before the wedding was incredibly simple. You're sleeping with him, Leora said, the betrayal slicing deeper than the freezing wind. The two people she trusted most in the world had orchestrated her execution. For 2 years, Robert confirmed coldly. You were just a stepping stone, Leora. A sweet, naive little stepping stone. Leora's flight or fight instinct finally kicked in. She drove her stiletto heel backward into Robert's shin and threw her elbows back, trying to break his grip. But the element of surprise was lost. Robert was stronger, and they were standing inches from the abyss. Don't make this messy, Leora, Robert snarled, grabbing her by the shoulders. You won't get away with this. The police will investigate. Leora screamed, her feet slipping on the slick, rain-soaked grass. Tragic accidents happen on these cliffs every year, Beatrice said, calmly, flicking her cigarette over the edge. A beautiful bride-to-be, eager for a photo, slips on the wet rocks. Her fiancé tries to save her but fails. It's a tragedy the tabloids will feast on. Robert looked into Leora's terrified, tear-filled eyes. There was no hesitation, no flicker of remorse. Just cold, absolute greed. Goodbye, Leora, he said. With a powerful, violent thrust, Robert shoved her backward. Leora's feet left the ground. For a suspended, agonizing millisecond, she saw Robert and Beatrice standing side by side on the edge of the cliff, watching her. Then gravity claimed her. The wind roared in her ears, a deafening hurricane of sound. The jagged rocks of the cliff face blurred as she plummeted downward. She tried to scream, but the air was ripped from her lungs. This was it. She was 28 years old, and her life was ending, not because of illness or age, but because she had loved a monster. She squeezed her eyes shut, bracing for the bone-crushing impact of the rocks and the freezing depths of the loch. But the impact never came. Instead of the brutal shattering crash of bone against stone, Leora's violent descent was halted by a force so sudden and impossibly strong, it knocked the remaining wind from her lungs. She didn't hit the water. She didn't hit the rocks. She was suspended in mid-air, roughly 50 feet above the churning loch. The roaring wind seemed to die down, replaced by a suffocating, terrifying stillness. Leora opened her eyes, her vision swimming with dizziness and shock. A pair of arms, feeling like bands of solid steel, wrapped in fine velvet, held her tight against a broad chest. "Breathe, Leora," a voice commanded. It was a voice that seemed to vibrate through her very bones, deep, aristocratic, and layered with a dangerous resonance that didn't sound entirely human. Leora gasped, pulling freezing air into her lungs, and looked up. Holding her was a man who looked like he had been carved from marble and shadow. He possessed an agonizingly beautiful face with sharp, aristocratic cheekbones, a strong jaw and thick, dark hair whipped by the storm. But it was his eyes that made Leora's heart stutter. They were a piercing, luminescent crimson, glowing faintly in the dim light of the overcast Scottish afternoon. "Who? What are you?" Leora choked out, trembling violently from both the freezing cold and absolute terror. They were hovering. They were literally defying gravity, standing on a narrow, almost invisible outcropping of rock, jutting from the side of the cliff, though it felt as if he wasn't standing on anything at all. "Noah," the man replied smoothly, his crimson eyes flicking upward toward the top of the cliff. "Noah Croft. And it seems, Leora Harrington, that your taste in men is abysmally poor." Leora knew that name. Noah Croft was the reclusive CEO of Croft Holdings, a massive, shadowy conglomerate that practically owned half of Europe's real estate and logistics networks. He was a phantom in the business world, never photographed, never interviewed. Yet here he was, hovering on a cliff face, his skin ice cold to the touch. You're not human," she whispered, her rational mind shattering into a million pieces. Noah's lips curved into a dark, knowing smile. He didn't answer her directly. Instead, he tightened his grip on her waist. "Hold your breath. The ascent is rather fast." Before Leora could question him, the world blurred. The sheer G-force of their movement pinned her against Noah's chest. He didn't climb the cliff. He bounded up it in massive, gravity-defying leaps, moving faster than the human eye could track. In mere seconds, he crested the edge of the cliff 100 yards away from where Robert and Beatrice were currently putting on a show of fake hysterical weeping for a passing motorist they had flagged down. Noah didn't stop. He carried Leora deep into the dense, ancient pine forest bordering the road, finally setting her down gently at the base of a towering, hollowed-out oak tree. Leora's legs immediately gave out. She collapsed into the damp moss, gasping for air, her entire body shaking uncontrollably. She looked at Noah, who stood perfectly still, completely unfazed by the cold, the rain, or the physical exertion. "Why?" Leora managed to say, wrapping her arms around her knees. "Why did you save me?" Noah crouched down, his movements, possessing the liquid predatory grace of a panther. Up close, Leora could see the faint, dark veins beneath his porcelain skin and the terrifying sharpness of his canine teeth when he parted his lips. "I have inhabited these highlands for 400 years, Leora," Noah said softly, his voice a dangerous purr. "I have seen wars, plagues, and the rise and fall of empires. Boredom is the greatest enemy of an immortal. But today the wind carried something incredibly intoxicating to me." He reached out his ice-cold fingertips, brushing a stray wet lock of auburn hair behind her ear. Leora flinched, but she couldn't look away from his hypnotic crimson gaze. "It wasn't just your blood," Noah continued, his nostrils flaring slightly. "Though your bloodline is extraordinarily potent, rare. It was the absolute, blinding fury radiating from your pulse as you fell. The universe is rarely so poetic. A betrayed bride, plunging to her death, radiating a thirst for vengeance, so pure, it woke me from my slumber." Leora looked through the trees, catching a distant glimpse of the flashing blue lights of emergency vehicles arriving at the cliffside. Robert was putting on the performance of a lifetime, burying his face in his hands, while Beatrice comforted him. The rage that had been masked by shock suddenly ignited inside Leora's chest. It was a hot, white, burning fire. They were going to get away with it. They were going to take her company, her money, her life, and drink champagne over her closed casket. "He tried to murder me," Leora whispered, her voice hardening. The tears stopped falling. "He's going to steal my family's legacy." "He will certainly try," Noah agreed, standing up to his full imposing height. "By tomorrow morning, the world will mourn the tragic accidental death of Leora Harrington. Robert Pendleton will inherit £50 million, and your beloved company will fall into the hands of the woman who betrayed you." Leora scrambled to her feet, her hands balled into tight fists. "I have to go to the police. I have to show them I'm alive. I'll testify against him." "And what will you say?" Noah challenged, smoothly crossing his arms. "That he pushed you. He will claim you slipped. Beatrice will corroborate his story. 2 against 1. You have no proof of his financial ruin that he can't easily hide or spin. You return now and you remain a target. Next time, he might poison your tea or tamper with your brakes. The justice system of mortals is notoriously flawed, Leora. It caters to the wealthy and the deceitful." Leora froze. He was right. Robert was a master manipulator. If she walked out of these woods alive, he would simply finish the job later, and this time he wouldn't miss. Then what do I do? Leora asked, her voice trembling not with fear, but with a burgeoning dark resolve. Noah stepped into her personal space. The sheer power radiating from him was intoxicating, terrifying and alluring all at once. You make a pact. With me. He raised his wrist to his mouth and bit down. Blood, dark, rich, and unnaturally vibrant, welled from the wound. You are broken, Leora, Noah murmured, offering his bleeding wrist to her. The shock, the cold, the sheer terror, your mortal heart is struggling to keep up. Drink. It will heal the micro-fractures in your spine from the G-force of my catch. It will fortify your body. And more importantly, it will tether you to my world. Leora stared at the blood. Her rational mind screamed at her to run to flee this gothic nightmare and take her chances with the police. But as she looked back toward the road, seeing the silhouette of Robert shaking hands with an officer playing the innocent victim, the choice became crystal clear. Justice wasn't enough. She wanted to ruin him. She wanted him to feel the same terrifying plunge into the abyss that she had just experienced. What do you want in return? Leora asked, her eyes shifting from his bleeding wrist to his face. Noah's smile was devastatingly cruel and breathtakingly handsome. I want your allegiance. I want to mold you, Leora. I will give you the wealth, the power, and the shadows of the immortal underground to dismantle Robert Pendleton, brick by brick. And when he is utterly broken, begging for death in the dirt, you will rule the corporate empire by my side. Leora didn't hesitate. She stepped forward, wrapped her hands around Noah's cold forearm, and pressed her lips to his wrist. The moment the thick metallic liquid touched her tongue, an explosion of heat rushed through her veins. The freezing Scottish air no longer bothered her. Her senses sharpened to a razor's edge. She could hear the flutter of a moth's wings a mile away, and she could smell the iron in Robert's sweat from the cliff edge. Noah watched her, his crimson eyes glowing with dark triumph as he pulled her close. The naive heiress had died on that cliff. In her place, a queen of the night was born. Welcome to the shadows, Leora, Noah whispered into the mist. Now let us plan a resurrection. 6 months had passed since Leora Harrington supposedly perished in the treacherous waters of Loch Leven. In London, the world had moved on. Robert Pendleton had executed his performance of the grieving fiancé to perfection, sobbing before the cameras, weeping at a lavish memorial service, and neatly collecting the £50 million insurance payout. With Leora's father broken by grief and hospitalized in a private facility overseas, Robert and Beatrice Lawson had seized total control of Harrington Pharmaceuticals. They had moved into Leora's sprawling Belgravia townhouse, their illicit romance now flaunted under the guise of comforting each other through tragedy. Tonight, they were celebrating their undisputed victory. The grand ballroom at the Savoy was packed with London's elite for the annual Winter Solstice Gala, a high society charity event that Harrington Pharmaceuticals was anchoring. Robert stood near the towering ice sculpture, a crystal glass of scotch in his hand. He looked impeccably handsome in his Tom Ford tuxedo, his chest swelling with the arrogant confidence of a man who had committed the perfect crime. Beatrice stood beside him, draped in emerald silk diamonds dripping from her neck, diamonds that had once belonged to Leora's grandmother. The board approved the restructuring this afternoon. Robert, Beatrice whispered, tapping her manicured nails against her champagne flute. By next Monday, the Harrington family name will be legally removed from the holding group. It's entirely ours. To a long, prosperous life. Robert raised his glass, clinking it against hers, and to tragic, clumsy accidents. They shared a dark, knowing smile, completely oblivious to the fact that the temperature in the ballroom had suddenly plunged. The heavy oak doors of the ballroom swung open. The ambient noise of the string quartet and elite chatter died instantly, replaced by a suffocating, breathless silence. Walking into the room was a couple that seemed to radiate a gravitational pull so immense it physically arrested everyone in attendance. The man was Noah Croft, dressed in a flawless midnight black tuxedo, his towering frame, aristocratic features, and eyes that seemed almost unnaturally dark commanded absolute submission. But it was the woman on his arm who caused Robert's heart to completely stop. She wore a backless, blood-red silk gown that hugged every curve of her flawless silhouette. Her auburn hair was styled in vintage Hollywood waves, cascading over a neck that was porcelain pale and unblemished. Her lips were painted a deep crimson, matching the chilling, predatory confidence in her eyes. "My God!" Beatrice choked out her face, instantly draining of color. Her champagne glass slipped from her fingers, shattering on the polished marble floor. "Robert, look at her." Robert's hand shook so violently his scotch spilled over his fingers. It's impossible. She's dead. I saw her fall. I watched the water engulf her." It was Leora. But it wasn't the Leora they knew. The soft, naive, easily manipulated heiress was gone. In her place stood a woman who looked like a lethal goddess, moving with a fluid, terrifyingly graceful stride that didn't sound like ordinary human footsteps. Noah guided Leora directly toward the frozen, terrified couple. The crowd parted for them like the Red Sea. Robert. Beatrice. Leora purred her voice, carrying a resonant, melodic quality that sent a primal shiver down their spines. "You both look like you've seen a ghost." "Leora," Robert stammered, his voice cracking as he instinctively took a step back. You're alive. The police, they searched for weeks. They said you were swept out to sea." "The Scottish Sea is remarkably cold, Robert," Leora said, stepping closer. The scent of ozone rain and something ancient and metallic wafted from her. "But fortunately for me, Noah possesses a very effective search and rescue team. He found me washed ashore, clinging to life. It took 6 long months in a private clinic in Switzerland to put me back together." Noah smiled, a flash of white teeth that looked dangerously sharp under the chandelier lights. "When I found Miss Harrington, she was broken. But she is a woman of extraordinary resilience. We have spent the last few months reorganizing our assets. As of 9 o'clock this morning, Croft Holdings has acquired 51% of Harrington Pharmaceuticals' outstanding debt. I am now the majority shareholder." Beatrice's eyes went wide with horror. "That's impossible. The debt was secured through private offshore entities that I bought out Miss Lawson." Noah's voice was smooth, yet it carried the weight of a death sentence. "I own your debt, I own your mortgages, and by extension, I own you." Robert tried to regain his composure, his corporate mask slipping back into place, though sweat beaded at his hairline. "Leora, please. This is a public event. If you survived, we should talk in private. I've missed you terribly. The grief was destroying me." Leora tilted her head, watching his desperate attempt to lie with an expression of pure, chilling amusement. With her heightened vampire senses, she could hear his heart hammering a frantic, erratic rhythm against his ribs. She could smell the sour, bitter scent of fear sweating through his expensive suit. "I'm sure it was Robert," Leora whispered, leaning in so close her lips almost brushed his ear. "Enjoy the party tonight, because tomorrow the nightmare begins." The dismantling of Robert Pendleton and Beatrice Lawson was not a sudden explosion, but a meticulous, agonizingly slow bleeding out. Noah had taught Leora well, true revenge wasn't just taking a life. It was destroying everything a person valued until they begged for the sweet release of death. Within 48 hours of the gala, Croft Holdings called in all of Harrington Pharmaceuticals' outstanding loans. Robert frantically tried to liquidate assets, only to find that the internal financial records Beatrice had altered to hide their embezzlement had been mysteriously leaked to the City of London Police and the Inland Revenue. By the end of the week, trading in the company's stock was frozen. Beatrice was arrested at her penthouse, dragged out in handcuffs in front of a horde of media tipped off by an anonymous source. Desperate to save herself, Beatrice cracked under interrogation within hours, turning state's evidence and exposing Robert's financial ruin and their years-long affair. But Leora had ensured the police wouldn't get Robert. Not yet. On a freezing, rain-slicked Tuesday night, exactly 6 months to the day of her attempted murder, Robert found himself running through the dense woods of Glencoe. His car had mysteriously died on the isolated Highland Road, his phone completely devoid of signal. Panic had driven him out into the dark, chasing what he thought was a flickering light in the distance. Instead, he stumbled into the clearing, overlooking the exact cliff where he had pushed Leora. The wind howled a deafening roar that mirrored the night of the betrayal. Standing at the edge of the abyss, her red cloak billowing around her like a shroud of blood, was Leora. Beside her stood Noah, enveloped in the shadows, his glowing crimson eyes, the only visible feature in the darkness. Leora. Robert gasped, his clothes soaked, his shoes caked in mud. He fell to his knees, utterly broken. "Please, I know what I did was monstrous." Beatrice forced my hand. She threatened to expose my debts if I didn't get rid of you. It was her idea. Leora turned around slowly. In the moonlight, her skin was translucent, her beauty supernatural and terrifying. "The human capacity for cowardice never ceases to amaze me, Robert. You pushed me with your own hands. I'll give it all back. The money, the company, everything." Robert wept, crawling toward her on his hands and knees. "Just let me live. Go to the police. Tell them it was an accident. Testify for me." Noah stepped forward, the ground beneath his feet, seemingly cracking from the sheer density of his immortal aura. "He smells of pathetic desperation, Leora. Shall I tear his throat out now, or would you prefer to watch him drop?" "No." Leora said, her voice commanding and cold. Noah paused, bowing his head slightly in deference to his new queen. Leora walked over to Robert, grabbing him by the lapels of his wet jacket. With a strength that defied physical laws, she lifted his entire 6-foot frame into the air with a single hand. Robert screamed, dangling helplessly over the 300-foot drop. The churning black waters of Loch Leven roared below, waiting for him. "Look down, Robert," Leora commanded, her voice vibrating with dark vampiric power. "Remember this feeling, the absolute terror of knowing the person you loved took everything from you. Leora, please, have mercy." He shrieked, his legs kicking wildly in the empty air. "Mercy died on this cliff," Leora whispered, her canine fangs lengthening, gleaming sharply in the moonlight. "But I am not a murderer like you. I am something much worse. I am your reckoning." With a disdainful flick of her wrist, Leora didn't drop him over the edge. Instead, she hurled him backward, slamming his body hard against the rocky ground of the clearing. Robert groaned, coughing up blood, his ribs shattered. Before he could process his survival, the blinding headlights of 3 police cruisers tore through the trees, their sirens wailing. Noah had orchestrated the timing perfectly. The police had found Robert's abandoned car, and Beatrice's signed confession had officially upgraded the investigation to attempted murder. Robert looked up, blinking through the mud and blood, but Leora and Noah were already gone. They had vanished into the mist like phantoms. The police officers tackled Robert to the ground, pinning his arms behind his back and pressing his face into the freezing dirt. As the handcuffs clicked shut around his wrists, Robert looked toward the dark canopy of the forest. There, perched high in the branches of an ancient oak, stood Leora and Noah. Leora stared down at him, her crimson eyes glowing with absolute triumph. Robert knew he was going to a maximum security prison for the rest of his life, but he also knew that prison walls wouldn't keep him safe. He would spend every second of every day looking into the shadows, waiting for the night the Vampire Queen decided to come back for the rest of her debt. Noah wrapped his dark cloak around Leora, pulling her close as they dissolved into the midnight fog, leaving the mortal world to clean up the wreckage of their wrath. The blood pact is sealed, and vengeance has been served. Leora and Noah now rule their dark empire from the shadows, proving that some betrayals carry a price that echoes through eternity. If you loved this thrilling tale of dark romance betrayal and ruthless vampire revenge, don't forget to hit that like button. Right now, share this video with your friends who love juicy dramas and subscribe to the channel for more spine-chilling stories every week. Turn on notifications so you never miss a twist.